The first warning did not come from a scream. It did not come from a neighbor. It did not come from a frantic call in the middle of the night. It came from a camera at the front door of an 84-year-old woman's home in Tucson, Arizona. A camera meant to protect her. A camera meant to record anything strange before it got close enough to matter. Then, at 1:47 in the morning, that camera disconnected. Less than an hour later, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker app lost contact. By morning, she was gone, and the last known person to drop her off alive was not a stranger. It was her son-in-law. For weeks, the public looked at that one fact and tried to make it mean something. But the deeper investigators went, the more dangerous the case became, because one detail kept pulling everyone back to the same question. Who was the masked person at Nancy Guthrie's door? Before we go deeper, take 1 second to like this video and subscribe to True Crime Greyson. This case is still open, and the more people who understand the confirmed timeline, the harder it becomes for the truth to disappear. Nancy Guthrie was not the kind of person who simply vanished without someone noticing. She was 84 years old. She lived in the Catalina foothills area of Tucson, Arizona. She had difficulty walking. She had a pacemaker. She needed daily medication for a heart condition. Those details matter because from the beginning, this was never a normal missing person report. A woman with limited mobility does not leave her home in the early morning hours without her essentials and vanish into the dark without raising questions. A woman who depends on daily medication does not stay away for days without danger. A woman with a fixed routine, a church community, and family close enough to notice when something feels wrong does not disappear into silence without leaving a mark behind. But on the morning of February 1st, 2026, that is exactly what Nancy Guthrie seemed to have done. She was not at church. That was the first human alarm. A friend noticed she had not shown up. That detail sounds small at first, but it tells you something important about Nancy. People expected her. People knew her pattern. People noticed when the seat she should have filled stayed empty. That friend contacted Nancy's family. Then the family went to check on her. They arrived at her home. They searched. They looked for a simple explanation. A fall, a phone left in another room, a missed ride, a medical issue. Anything ordinary enough to make the fear stop rising. But Nancy was not there. Her belongings were still there. Her life was still there. The house still held the shape of her routine, but Nancy herself was gone. By around noon, authorities were notified. Deputies arrived at the home around 12:15. Very quickly, the situation turned from concern into something darker. Investigators did not treat it like a woman who had wandered off by choice. Nancy's age, her limited mobility, her medical needs, and the condition of the home all pushed the case in another direction. The question was no longer, where did Nancy go? The question became, who took her? To understand why that question grew so fast, you have to go back to the night before. January 30 first began like an ordinary day. Nothing about it, at least from the outside, looked like the beginning of a case that would pull in local deputies, federal agents, national media, and thousands of people watching every update with the same uneasy feeling. That evening, Nancy went to the home of her older daughter, Annie Guthrie. She arrived there at 5:32 in the evening. She had dinner with family. At first, this sounds like the kind of detail that belongs in any family timeline. A mother visits her daughter. A family shares a meal. Night comes. Someone drives her home. But in a disappearance case, ordinary details become markers. They become the last known pieces of normal life before everything breaks. Nancy was later dropped off at her own home around 9:48 that night. The person who dropped her off was her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni. That single fact placed his name at the center of public attention, even before the full picture was known. He was the last known person to see Nancy after that dinner. He was the person who brought her back to the place where she would vanish hours later. Police later said he waited until Nancy was inside before driving away. Around 9:50, her garage door closed. To investigators, that moment became one of the anchor points in the timeline. Nancy was home. The door closed. The evening should have ended there. A daughter's house, a family dinner, a son-in-law dropping an elderly woman home, a garage door shutting at night. That is the kind of ending people expect from an ordinary Saturday. But this case did not stay ordinary. Hours passed. The neighborhood settled into the quiet that comes after midnight. Houses dark, roads empty, Tucson asleep under the desert night. Then came 1:47 in the morning. A doorbell camera at Nancy Guthrie's home disconnected. That detail would become one of the most important points in the investigation, because cameras do not disconnect themselves for no reason in the middle of a case like this. Sometimes technology fails. Sometimes batteries die. Sometimes Wi-Fi drops. Investigators know all of that. But then another detail arrived. Around 25 minutes later, software detected motion. At first, officials did not have clear video available. That made the timeline more unsettling, because the system had registered something, but the public did not yet know what had happened in front of that door. Then, days later, the FBI released images and video from the camera system. That was when the case changed for everyone watching. The footage showed an armed individual appearing to tamper with the front door camera at Nancy's home in the early morning hours of her disappearance. The person was masked. The person wore gloves. The person carried a backpack. The person appeared to have a holstered gun. The FBI described the individual as male, around 5'9" to 5'10", with an average build, wearing a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack. Now the public had an image, not a name, not a clear face, not an arrest, but an image. And sometimes, an image becomes more haunting than a full explanation, because it gives you enough to fear, but not enough to understand. Who was he? Why was he there? Why Nancy? Was he alone? Did he know the layout of the home? Did he know Nancy lived there? Did he know she had just been dropped off hours earlier? Did he come for her? Or did he come for something else and find her? The camera did not answer those questions. It only made them sharper. Then came the pacemaker detail. Nancy had a pacemaker. The FBI described her as a vulnerable adult with a pacemaker and a need for daily heart medication. Public reporting said her pacemaker app disconnected from her phone at 2:28 in the morning. That timestamp matters. It does not prove what happened inside the home. It does not tell the public whether Nancy was alive or injured at that exact second. It does not give a full medical story, but it gives investigators another marker. First, the doorbell camera disconnects at 1:47. Then, motion is detected. Then the pacemaker app loses contact at 2008. After that, the night goes quiet. By morning, Nancy does not appear at church. Her family checks the home. She is gone. That is the confirmed spine of the case. And when you lay those times next to each other, the picture becomes hard to ignore. A vulnerable elderly woman is returned home late at night. A front door camera goes dark hours later. A masked, gloved, armed individual is seen tampering with the camera. Her pacemaker app loses contact. By daylight, she is missing. This is why investigators moved fast. This is why authorities treated the home and surrounding area as a crime scene. This is why the FBI stepped in. This is why Nancy Guthrie's case stopped being a private family emergency and became a national search. But even with the camera image, even with the timeline, even with the FBI reward, the case still had one problem. Nancy was gone, and no one had publicly named the person who took her. That absence created a dangerous gap. And when a case has a gap, the public tries to fill it. The first name many people focused on was Tommaso Cioni, Nancy's son-in-law. Not because authorities named him as a suspect, not because there was public proof tying him to the disappearance, but because he was the last known person to drop Nancy off at her home. That fact was real, and because it was real, people built questions around it. What did he see when he dropped her off? Was anything unusual? Did Nancy seem calm? Did she seem worried? Was anyone nearby? Did he notice a vehicle? Did the garage close normally? Did the house look different? Did Nancy have plans for the next morning? Those questions make sense in an investigation. The last person to see someone alive or safe often becomes important to the timeline. But there is a line between timeline importance and accusation, and in this case, that line matters. Authorities later said Nancy Guthrie's family members, including siblings and spouses, were not suspects. The sheriff said the family had cooperated and described them as victims. That statement matters because public suspicion can turn cruel when facts lag behind fear. A person being part of a timeline does not make that person guilty. A person being last to see someone does not prove involvement. A person's name appearing in reports does not replace evidence. The confirmed record says Tommaso Cioni dropped Nancy at home. Police said he waited until she was inside before driving away. The confirmed record also says family members, including spouses, were later cleared as possible suspects. Both things must be held together. That is how responsible true crime works. You follow the tension, but you do not outrun the evidence. And the evidence, at least publicly, was pointing toward the masked person at the door. The footage became the center of the case because it showed intent. Someone did not merely pass by Nancy's home. Someone did not accidentally step onto the porch. Someone approached the front door in the dark, covered, gloved, carrying what appeared to be a weapon, and tampered with a camera. That act tells a story, even before the person's identity is known. It suggests preparation. It suggests fear of being recorded. It suggests the person understood that the camera mattered, and the timing makes the act even more disturbing. This was not days before Nancy disappeared. This was the morning she vanished. When the FBI released the images, the public started studying every visible detail: the backpack, the clothing, the build, the way the person stood, the gloves, the mask, the angle of the body, the equipment, the moment itself. People wanted the image to give them a name. But images do not always do that. Sometimes they give investigators a shape, then leave them with the harder work of turning that shape into a person. That work expanded beyond the home. Investigators searched the neighborhood. They canvassed the area. They looked at external cameras. They searched for objects. They followed leads. A pair of gloves found a few miles from Nancy's home became part of the public conversation because authorities said the gloves appeared to match those worn by the person in the footage. DNA from the gloves was tested, but when the results came back, there was no CODIS hit. That means the sample did not match entries in the National DNA Database. It did not give authorities an immediate name. For the public, it felt like a door opening, then closing again. A clue had been found. A lab had tested it, but the result did not point straight to a suspect. That is one of the hardest parts of a case like this. Every detail feels like it should be the breakthrough. A glove, a camera image, a backpack, a time stamp, a drop-off, a pacemaker app, a ransom note, a search warrant, a DNA test. Each one feels close. Then the answer slips farther away. Authorities also said additional DNA evidence was being analyzed. Later reporting brought more confusion when new claims about DNA and hair evidence circulated. The FBI later clarified that certain DNA evidence being discussed publicly was not new. It had already been submitted for testing earlier, and no public breakthrough had been announced from it. That clarification mattered because in a high-profile case, every rumor starts to feel like a result. Every report sounds like the case is cracked. Every phrase like new DNA or breakthrough evidence spreads fast. But investigators move slower than headlines. Lab work takes time. Evidence needs chain of custody. Samples need testing. Mixed samples create problems. No-hit results do not end a case, but they do not solve it either. And while the public waited for science to catch up, Nancy's family was dealing with something much more human. They did not have Nancy. They did not have proof she was safe. They did not have a direct line to whoever may have taken her. They had questions. They had fear. And they had a camera image of a masked person outside her home. Then came the ransom note reports. Authorities and media reports said apparent ransom messages had surfaced through news outlets. One report included a demand involving Bitcoin. There were deadlines. There were public appeals. There was confusion about whether the messages were real, whether they came from the person responsible, or whether they were part of something else entirely. That uncertainty added another layer of pain, because a ransom message creates hope and terror at the same time. Hope, because it suggests the missing person might still be alive. Terror, because it means someone might be holding them. But officials said there had been no known direct contact between any suspect and the family or authorities. Reuters reported that no proof of life had surfaced, while the sheriff also said there was no proof of death. That is one of the cruelest spaces a family can live inside. No proof of life, no proof of death, no confirmed suspect, no location, no ending, only waiting. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings made public appeals. Their messages were directed toward whoever had Nancy. If someone had her, they pleaded for communication. They said they were willing to pay. They asked for proof their mother was alive. In one appeal, Savannah raised a point that belongs directly to the times we live in. She said the family needed proof because voices and images can be manipulated with artificial intelligence. That detail makes this case feel even more unsettling. Years ago, proof of life might have meant a photo, a voice recording, a phrase, a call. Now even those things need scrutiny. A family in crisis cannot simply trust what appears on a screen. They have to wonder if the sound of their mother's voice is real. They have to wonder if an image is real. They have to wonder if a message came from the person responsible or from someone trying to exploit a tragedy. This is what modern fear looks like. Not just a missing mother, not just a ransom note, but a world where even proof can be faked. And still the family kept speaking. They spoke because silence was not an option. They spoke because Nancy needed medication. They spoke because every hour mattered. They spoke because someone, somewhere, might know something and not realize how important it was. They spoke because the person in the camera footage had to come from somewhere, had to walk somewhere, had to carry that backpack somewhere, had to leave behind some trace. A neighbor might have seen a vehicle. A store clerk might have seen the backpack. A camera might have caught a shadow. A person might have heard a comment. A friend might know someone who changed their routine after that night. A small clue can become the hinge of an entire investigation. That is why the FBI offered a reward of up to $100,000 for information leading to Nancy's location or the arrest and conviction of anyone involved in her disappearance. The reward was not only about money, it was pressure. It was a message. Someone knows something, and investigators wanted that person to speak. As the days passed, the search widened. Officials and search teams looked through areas near Nancy's home. Federal, state, and local resources became part of the effort. The public response was enormous. Phone calls poured in. Tips came in. Not every call was useful. Not every tip was real. But investigators had to sort through them, because one of them might matter. That is the hidden work behind a case like this. The public sees the press conferences, the video clips, the reward posters, the emotional appeals. Investigators see piles of data. They see camera angles. They see timelines. They see phone records. They see lab reports. They see objects collected from roadsides. They see false leads. They see tips that go nowhere. They see tips that sound weak until one detail matches. They see how much of a case is built not from one dramatic moment, but from hundreds of small confirmations. And in the Nancy Guthrie case, the confirmed timeline kept returning to the same early morning window, 1:47. The camera disconnects. Around 25 minutes later, motion is detected. 2:28. The pacemaker app loses contact. Morning. Nancy is not at church. Noon. Authorities are called. That window became the dark center of the story. But the hours before it mattered too. The last family dinner, the ride home, the garage closing, the house settling, the time between ordinary and unthinkable. That is why the son-in-law angle drew attention. It was not because responsible reporting should accuse him. It was because the timeline placed him at the edge of the last known normal moment. He dropped Nancy off. He waited until she went inside. He drove away. Then, hours later, the camera went dark. For a documentary, that sequence creates tension. But tension is not proof. It has to be handled carefully. The most important line is this. Authorities later said the family, including spouses, was not suspected. That does not remove Tommaso from the timeline. It places him correctly inside it. He is part of what happened before the disappearance. The masked individual is part of what investigators publicly released after the disappearance. And Nancy is the center of both. That is where the story must stay. Nancy. Not speculation, not rumor, not the hunger to turn uncertainty into accusation. Nancy was the person who vanished. Nancy was the one who needed medication. Nancy was the one whose routine broke. Nancy was the one whose home became a crime scene. Nancy was the one whose family stood in front of cameras and asked for help. And Nancy was the one still missing as the case moved deeper into its third month. At this point, hit like and subscribe to True Crime Greyson if you want fact-based true crime with tension, but without reckless accusations. Cases like this deserve attention, but they also deserve care. The public pressure around the case grew in waves. First came the missing person report. Then came the family connection to a national television figure. Then came the doorbell camera footage. Then came the ransom note reports. Then came the blood evidence. Then came the glove. Then came the DNA testing. Then came the clarification that some evidence being discussed as new was not new. Every wave brought attention, but attention has two sides. It helps because more people see the footage. More people hear the description. More people search their memory. But it also hurts when speculation begins to replace facts. That is why the sheriff's statement about the family was so important. He said the family had cooperated. He said family members were victims. That was not only a legal clarification, it was a human one. Because when someone disappears, the family loses control of their private pain. The worst moment of their life becomes content, conversation, posts, guesses, arguments, theories. People who have never met them start deciding who looked right, who sounded wrong, who cried enough, who did not speak fast enough, who should have done more, who should have done less. That kind of public judgment can become its own kind of cruelty. And in Nancy's case, the family had to deal with that while still not knowing where she was. Think about that for a moment. A mother is missing. The house has become a crime scene. A masked person is on camera. Ransom messages are circulating. DNA is being tested. The FBI is involved. The public is watching. And in the middle of it all, the family still wakes up every day without the one answer they need most. Where is Nancy? That question made the search feel urgent from the start, because Nancy's health made time dangerous. She had difficulty walking. She needed daily heart medication. She had a pacemaker. Those facts shaped every public appeal. The longer she remained missing, the more serious the fear became. But authorities did not publicly give up hope. The sheriff said there was no proof of death. He said the working presumption was that Nancy was alive. That kind of statement matters, not because it guarantees a hopeful outcome, but because it frames the search as active, urgent, and unfinished. Hope in a case like this is not soft. It is work. It is deputies searching roads. It is agents reviewing video. It is family members recording messages through tears. It is lab technicians testing samples. It is people calling tip lines. It is investigators returning to the same facts again and again until a pattern starts to show. And the biggest pattern still pointed to the unknown person. The person in the footage did not only become a suspect image. That person became the shape of the unknown. The mask concealed the face. The gloves concealed fingerprints. The camera tampering suggested awareness. The weapon suggested threat. The backpack suggested preparation. And the time of night suggested planning. That does not prove whether the person acted alone. It does not prove motive. It does not prove what happened inside the house. But it tells investigators where to focus. Who owned that backpack? Who had access to similar clothing? Who was in the area that morning? Who had reason to approach Nancy's home? Who knew her routine? Who knew she lived alone? Who knew she had returned home after dinner? Who had a vehicle nearby? Who changed behavior after February 1st? Who searched online for the case before the footage went public? Who had injuries? Who had missing clothing? Who suddenly got rid of a backpack, gloves, or shoes? These are the questions investigators likely build around a released image, not because one image solves the case, but because one image lets them test the world around it. The backpack detail became especially important because the FBI identified the type. A black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack backpack. That level of detail gives the public something specific to remember, not just a backpack. A specific backpack, Someone might have seen it in a car. Someone might have seen it in a closet. Someone might have seen a person wearing it near the neighborhood. Someone might know a person who owned one and then stopped using it. The same goes for gloves. The gloves found a few miles from Nancy's home appeared to match the ones seen in the footage, according to the FBI. That made them significant. DNA testing gave investigators information, but no CODIS match. That result did not close the lead. It only meant there was no immediate match in that database. Authorities then looked toward other possibilities, including genetic genealogy databases. That path takes patience. Genetic genealogy has helped solve cases before, but it does not work like a simple name search. It often requires family tree work, distant relatives, careful comparison, legal steps, and time. For the public, waiting feels like nothing is happening. For investigators, waiting can be part of the work. Still, in Nancy's case, every day mattered. Every day without a suspect increased pressure. Every day without proof of life deepened fear. Every day without Nancy made the family's appeals feel more painful. The reported ransom messages added a strange layer because they suggested communication, but not the kind the family needed. If someone truly had Nancy and wanted payment, why contact media instead of the family? If the messages were fake, who would exploit the disappearance of an elderly woman for attention? If the messages were real, why provide no proof? If they were part of a larger plan, what was the plan? Authorities took the messages seriously enough to address them. The family responded with public appeals. Deadlines came and went, and still, Nancy was not returned. That is the part that makes the ransom note angle so unsettling. It promised movement, then left the case suspended. A demand without proof, a deadline without resolution, a message without a face. A family willing to pay, but with no clear path to the person who might have taken their mother. In one of the family appeals, Savannah Guthrie said, they believed their mother was still out there. Those words carried both hope and fear. Hope, because they refused to treat Nancy as gone. Fear, because out there is a vast phrase in Arizona. Out there can mean a house, a vehicle, a room, a road, a desert space, a person's memory, a hidden place. An answer no one has reached yet. Investigators searched areas connected to the case. They also searched a home in Rio Rico, about 60 miles south of Tucson, and took a man into custody for questioning. That person was later released, and no arrest was made. That detail matters because it shows movement in the investigation, but also caution. A search does not equal guilt. Questioning does not equal arrest. Detention does not equal conviction. The public often sees law enforcement activity and assumes the case has been solved. But a responsible timeline keeps each step in its proper place. Authorities searched. A man was questioned. He was released. No arrests were made. That is the fact-safe version, and it leaves the bigger question open. If not him, then who? The case kept circling back to evidence that was visible but incomplete. Blood was found outside Nancy's home and later confirmed to be hers. That was one of the most disturbing public facts in the case. It strengthened the belief that something serious happened at or near the home. It also made the idea of a voluntary disappearance even harder to accept. But even that evidence did not tell the whole story. Blood tells investigators there was injury or contact, but not the full sequence. The camera tells them someone tampered with the device, but not what happened after. The pacemaker app tells them contact was lost, but not the full medical reality. The glove tells them someone may have left evidence behind, but DNA did not give an immediate match. The ransom notes tell them someone sent messages, but not whether the sender was responsible. The family timeline tells them when Nancy was last known safe, but not where she went after the early morning hours. This is why the case feels both full of evidence and painfully incomplete. There are pieces everywhere, but the center is still missing. Nancy is still missing. That absence changes the emotional weight of every clue. A solved case with evidence brings answers. An unsolved case with evidence brings pressure. Every clue points somewhere, but until that direction ends with Nancy or the person responsible, the case remains unfinished. That is why public attention remains important. The person in the footage did not vanish from existence after leaving the porch. They went somewhere. They carried clothing somewhere. They had a life before that morning, and a life after. Someone may know the way they walk. Someone may remember the backpack. Someone may remember an unusual absence. Someone may remember a conversation that felt meaningless then, but important now. True crime audiences sometimes think the breakthrough always comes from a lab or a detective's dramatic insight. Often it comes from a person who finally speaks. A neighbor who remembers a car. A friend who remembers a comment. A store worker who remembers a purchase. A relative who notices a missing item. A driver who saw someone walking where no one usually walks. A person who dismissed a detail because it seemed too small. In a case like Nancy Guthrie's, no small detail should stay buried in someone's mind. Because the investigators already have the outline. They know Nancy's last confirmed evening. They know when she got home. They know when the garage closed. They know when the camera disconnected. They know when motion was detected. They know when the pacemaker app lost contact. They know she missed church. They know blood was found. They know the family was cleared. They know a masked armed person tampered with the door camera. They know gloves found miles away looked similar to the gloves in the footage. They know DNA testing did not give an easy hit. They know public ransom messages created more questions. What they still need is the bridge between those facts. They need the name. They need the path. They need the location. They need Nancy. The emotional center of the case is not only the mystery, it is the waiting. Waiting is its own kind of punishment. When someone dies and the facts are known, grief begins with pain, but it has a shape. When someone vanishes, the pain has no edges. A phone ringing can feel like hope. A strange car can feel like a clue. A news update can feel like rescue. A silence can feel like dread. Nancy's family has had to live inside that space while the entire country watches. They have had to ask strangers for help. They have had to speak to whoever might be responsible. They have had to weigh ransom messages without proof. They have had to face rumors about the family. They have had to hear official updates that sound promising, then learn they did not produce answers. They have had to keep Nancy's name alive. That is one of the reasons victim-centered storytelling matters. Nancy Guthrie is not a puzzle piece. She is not a famous person's mother only. She is not just the woman from the doorbell footage case. She is a person whose normal life was interrupted. She had a home. She had family. She had a church routine. She had medical needs. She had people who expected her to show up. That last point is important. When Nancy missed church, someone noticed. That tells you she belonged somewhere. It tells you her absence did not blend into the background. She had a place in other people's lives. And when she did not appear, the alarm began. A lot of cases begin that way. Not with police lights, not with breaking news, with someone saying, "She is never late. She always calls. She would not miss this. She would have told me." That is how love becomes evidence. A routine becomes a timeline. A missed church service becomes the first sign that something is wrong. And because that sign came quickly, authorities had a narrower window to work with. That window gave the investigation structure. January 31st, evening dinner with family. 9:48, drop off at home. 9:50, garage door closes. 1:47, camera disconnects. Around 2:12, motion detected. 2:28, pacemaker app loses contact. Morning, Nancy misses church. Late morning, family checks. Around noon, authorities notified. That timeline is the heartbeat of the case. Every theory has to survive it. Every tip has to fit around it. Every suspect lead has to answer it. Every piece of evidence has to be placed somewhere inside or near it. That is why unsupported stories about secret confessions, buried medical devices, or hidden accomplices need to be handled with extreme care. A high-retention story should never depend on claims that public evidence does not support. The real timeline is already chilling enough. A camera went dark. A masked person appeared. A vulnerable woman disappeared. Her blood was found. Her family pleaded. No suspect was publicly identified. That is enough tension because it is true. And truth carries a different weight from rumor. Rumor burns fast. Truth stays. As the weeks passed, The investigation continued under intense scrutiny. Some reports focused on evidence handling. Some focused on the use of a private lab. Some focused on whether DNA testing should have moved faster. Some focused on the FBI's clarification that certain DNA evidence was not new. Some focused on disagreements or public confusion between agencies. For viewers, those details can feel technical, but in an active missing-to-person investigation, process matters. Where evidence goes matters. How quickly it is tested matters. Whether a sample is clean or mixed matters. Whether a database returns a match matters. Whether agencies communicate clearly matters. Because every delay feels unbearable when a person is missing. Every unclear update feels like another wall. Every contradiction feels like a threat to the truth. But it is also important not to mistake complexity for cover-up. Large investigations are messy. Multiple agencies mean multiple systems. Evidence testing takes time. Public statements may shift as new information arrives. A lead that sounds major one week may turn less useful after testing. A sample that seems promising may not identify anyone. The public sees uncertainty. Investigators live inside it. Still, pressure has a purpose. Families deserve answers. The public deserves accurate information. And Nancy deserves a search that does not fade. One of the more unusual search details involved technology connected to Nancy's pacemaker. Authorities worked with experts to try to locate her by detecting signals from medical or electronic devices. Public reporting mentioned a device capable of detecting signals from wearable electronics and medical devices from the air or ground. That detail shows how far the search stretched. Investigators were not only knocking on doors or checking roads. They were using technology, lab work, public tips, surveillance, and search teams. They were trying to find a woman whose medical device, in another circumstance, might have helped locate her. But even that effort did not lead to a public recovery. The case remained open, and the unknown person from the footage remained unnamed. That is the shadow over everything. The camera gave the world a figure, but not a face. The FBI gave the world a description, but not a name. The reward gave the world an incentive, but not an answer. And each day without an arrest gave the public more space to guess. That is where a case becomes dangerous online. People start building stories around fragments. They take a last known sighting and turn it into guilt. They take a family member's silence and turn it into evidence. They take a rumor and give it the sound of law enforcement confirmation. They take emotional behavior and judge it like a test. But grief does not perform on command. Fear does not look the same on every face. Innocent people do not all act the way strangers expect them to act. And investigators do not name suspects simply because the public wants one. In Nancy's case, officials publicly cleared the family as suspects. That statement should sit near the center of every responsible retelling. Because the true unknown remains outside the family, at least according to the public statements from authorities. That unknown has a shape. A masked man, a backpack, gloves, a camera, a door, a Tucson home in the early morning. If this case is solved by a tip, it might come from someone who saw that shape before the FBI released it. Someone who saw a person with that backpack. Someone who saw a vehicle close to Nancy's neighborhood around that time. Someone who found clothing out of place. Someone who heard someone talk about Nancy's home. Someone who noticed a person following news of the case too closely. Someone who knows why a person would have been in Catalina foothills in those early morning hours. The FBI asked for information leading to the identity of the person in the images. That means the footage remains central, not the rumors, not the internet theories, the person in the images. And as long as that person remains unidentified, the case remains open in the most painful way. There is also another layer of fear in the timing. Nancy was dropped off around 9:48 at night. The camera disconnect happened hours later. That means the person who came to the door did not strike immediately after she returned, at least according to the public timeline. There was a gap, a long dark gap, between the ordinary end of the evening and the moment the camera went down. What happened during that time? Was Nancy asleep? Was she awake? Did she hear anything? Did the person know her schedule? Did the person wait? Did they choose the early morning because the neighborhood would be quiet? The public record does not answer those questions, but the questions are why the case holds attention. The mystery is not only who, it is timing, it is access, it is intent. It is how someone could approach a vulnerable woman's home and vanish with her before morning. It is how a neighborhood can sleep through the moment that changes a family forever. That does not mean neighbors fail. It means crimes often happen in the spaces where ordinary life lowers its guard. A quiet street, a familiar home, a camera that should record, a door that should stay closed, a night that should end with sleep. Then morning comes, and nothing is the same. By the time most people in the neighborhood woke up, Nancy Guthrie was already missing. That is the terror of the timeline. The key events happened while the world around her was still. And because of that, investigators had to rebuild the night from devices, footage, blood evidence, family statements, tips, and fragments. This is what modern investigation looks like. A house speaks through data. A camera speaks until it disconnects. A medical app gives one timestamp. A garage system gives another. A phone call from a church friend becomes part of the record. A glove on the side of the search area becomes a lab sample. A reward poster becomes a call for memory. And still, at the center of all that information, there is silence. Nancy's silence. The silence of the person who took her. The silence after the ransom deadlines passed. The silence after DNA produced no immediate CODIS match. The silence after no suspect was publicly announced. The case is filled with information, but the answer remains withheld. That is what makes it so gripping and so painful. In a fictional story, the masked person would be identified in the final act. The clue would click. The family would get a call. The case would resolve. But real cases do not obey structure. They stall. They turn. They confuse. They punish everyone who waits for them. A lead that looks major becomes minor. A test that looks promising returns no match. A person detained is released. A reward grows, but the silence holds. A family speaks again, but the person responsible does not. That is why the ending of this case has not arrived. And that is why every responsible retelling should end with the same fact. Nancy Guthrie is still missing. No public suspect has been announced. The investigation remains active. The FBI and Pima County authorities continue to ask for help. The camera image remains one of the most important clues. The family remains caught between hope and fear. The public should remember the description. Male, around 5'9" to 5'10". Average build, mask, gloves. Black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack, backpack. Appeared armed, tampered with the front door camera. That description is not just detail for a documentary. It is the shape of a possible answer. Somewhere someone may know who fits it. Somewhere someone may remember that backpack. Somewhere someone may know who had gloves like that. Somewhere someone may know who was near Nancy Guthrie's home in the early morning hours of February 1st. And somewhere Nancy's family is still waiting for the phone call that changes everything. When you look at the case from the beginning, the sequence feels almost unbearable. A family dinner, a ride home, a garage door closing, a quiet house, a camera going dark, a masked person, a pacemaker app disconnect, a missed church service, a family check, a crime scene, blood on the porch, ransom messages, public pleas, a glove, no DNA match, no announced suspect, no Nancy. Every part of that sequence leads forward, but none of it reaches the ending. And that is why the case still matters. Because unresolved cases are at risk of becoming content people consume and then forget. They trend, they fade, they return. When there is a new update, then they fade again. But families do not get to move like the news cycle. They live with the absence after the cameras leave. They keep hearing the empty space at the table. They keep checking messages. They keep measuring time by how long their mother has been gone. They keep hoping someone will finally say the one thing that matters. I know where she is. That is why Nancy's name needs to stay connected to verified facts, not rumors, not invented confessions, not dramatic claims with no public backing. Verified facts, because verified facts are what help a case. They point people toward real evidence. They protect innocent people from accusation. They keep pressure on the right questions, and the right questions in Nancy Guthrie's case are still clear. Who was the masked person at the door? Why did that person tamper with the camera? Where did Nancy go after the pacemaker app lost contact? Who sent the reported ransom messages? Were those messages connected to the real person responsible, or were they exploitation? What happened inside or near that home between the camera disconnect and the missing person report? Why has no suspect been publicly announced? What evidence remains under testing? And where is Nancy now? Those questions do not need exaggeration. They are strong enough because they are real. The most haunting part of the case is not that there are no clues. It is that there are clues, and yet Nancy remains missing. A clue without an answer becomes a kind of echo. The camera echoes. The backpack echoes. The glove echoes. The timeline echoes. The blood evidence echoes. The public appeals echo. And every echo returns to one name. Nancy. Not a headline. Not a theory. Not a famous person's relative. Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old woman who went home after dinner and vanished before morning. A woman with a medical condition. A woman with limited mobility. A woman expected at church. A woman whose family asked the public to help bring her home. That is the story. And until the person in that footage has a name, until the timeline has an ending, until the family has answers, this case remains unfinished. There is a moment in every unsolved case when the public has to decide whether it will keep paying attention after the first shock fades. The Nancy Guthrie case needs that attention. Not reckless attention. Not rumor-driven attention. Not harassment. Focused attention. The kind that remembers details. The kind that checks facts. The kind that shares the FBI description. The kind that pushes the right question into the right person's memory. A black 25-liter Ozark trail hiker. Backpack. A masked man. Gloves. A front door camera. Catalina foothills. Early morning. February 1st. That is what someone needs to remember. Maybe someone saw him before he reached the house. Maybe someone saw him after. Maybe someone saw the backpack in a vehicle. Maybe someone noticed a person return home without it. Maybe someone heard a story that did not make sense. Maybe someone has held back because they thought their detail was too small. In a case like this, small is not small. A small detail can confirm a route. A small detail can identify a person. A small detail can support a warrant. A small detail can connect one clue to another. A small detail can bring someone home. And that is all Nancy's family has been asking for from the beginning. Help, communication, proof, truth, the return of their mother. The investigation has already shown how many people care. Thousands of calls came in. Search teams worked. Federal agents joined. Reporters followed the story. Viewers shared the footage. Strangers learned Nancy's name. But caring has to become useful. Useful means staying with the facts. Useful means refusing to accuse cleared family members. Useful means remembering the suspect description. Useful means treating tips seriously. Useful means letting investigators test evidence without twisting every update into a false breakthrough. Useful means understanding that Nancy is a person, not a theory board. The case began in a private home, but it now belongs to every person who might hold one missing piece. And if that piece reaches investigators, the story could shift in a single moment. One call, one name, one matched item, one confirmed route, one person who finally tells the truth. Until then, the timeline remains suspended. 9:48. Nancy is dropped home. 9:50. The garage closes. 1:47. The camera disconnects. Around 2:12, motion is detected. 2:28. The pacemaker app loses contact. Morning. Church notices she is missing. Noon. The case begins. That timeline should never feel normal because it is the space between safety and disappearance. It is the space where an elderly woman's ordinary life was interrupted. It is the space where a masked person moved through the dark and left behind one of the most disturbing images in the case. And it is the space investigators are still trying to fill. The final answer may come from science. It may come from a tip. It may come from surveillance. It may come from someone close to the person in the footage. It may come from evidence already collected, waiting for the right test. But until it comes, the case remains open. Nancy Guthrie's family does not need more theories. They need Nancy. They need the person responsible identified. They need the timeline completed. They need to know what happened after the camera went dark. And they need the public to remember that a real woman is still at the center of this. So remember the facts. Remember the image. Remember the backpack. Remember the early morning timeline. Remember that authorities cleared the family. Remember that no public suspect has been announced. Remember that the reward exists because someone, somewhere, may know enough to change everything. And remember Nancy Guthrie, because the story does not end with a camera going dark. It does not end with a ransom note. It does not end with a DNA test. It does not end with public suspicion. It ends when Nancy is found, and when the person responsible has to answer for what happened in the light of day. Until then, this case has no final chapter. Only a missing woman, a family waiting for truth, and a question that still hangs over Tucson. Who was at Nancy Guthrie's door that night? If this case matters to you, like this video, subscribe to True Crime Greyson, and share it with someone who follows unsolved cases. One viewer, one memory, one detail, one tip. That is all it takes for a cold silence to break.